just under 2 weeks out from Talent Summit, being broadcast live from Dublin on March 3rd. I'm joined by Laura Phelan, who's Director of Human Capital Solutions at Aon and a long-time friend and collaborator of ours at Sigmar and Talent Summit. Laura, welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Delighted to be involved again this year. Very excited.
I know. Aren't the themes really, really juicy this year? Like, there's so much happening,
Incredible.
isn't there? Yeah.
So much. And actually, I think this year, everybody is talking about this. There's a massive theme around the whole human experience, agile working, future of work, what's happening. Everyone is grappling with similar issues this year. So I think that makes it really exciting.
It is, no, for sure. And I think even just look into the rearview mirror for one moment to see what we've been through is kind of like a small part of it. But really, where the rubber hits the road is as the restrictions lift, Laura. Like, what does that mean for how we transform now that we have choice? And I think that's the real point of difference from having this dislocation of the workforce from the workplace forced upon us, that now we've got choice. And like, when I think about the themes, Laura, and I throw it over to you, I think about like, how do we kind of reclaim what we've lost? How do we keep what we've gained as restrictions lift? And then into three categories, like where, by whom, and how work gets done. But the main one, I think, is that shift from the employee experience with the deep individualization of work to human experience. We call that HX. And that's, as you know, the social well-being, mental and physical well-being of the individual. And that needs to be at the heart of how we consider the redesign of work. And aren't we presented with a massive opportunity, like once in a lifetime opportunity, I think, for HR leaders to really have a say, to re-architect a better working world. What are you seeing around that shift from employee experience to HX, Laura?
Yeah, I totally see, and agree everything you're saying there. And a couple of things just jump out at me in what you've been talking about. And you started by talking about choice. And that really resonates with me, because a lot of what I'm hearing and talking about at the moment is that choice. Who gets to choose? Who gets to work where in the future? And I think the way you've described the role of HR is critical to that. The HR people are at the front and center of being the architects, not necessarily being the big brother or the dictators. It is the architects of the future world of work for the individuals and humans, and the human experience within that future world of work, alongside obviously the organization. And I just think that the kind of shift is around what's best for individuals and humans in their lives, and work is such a huge part of that life. And their own choices, their own preferences, but also, I suppose, there's an obligation on the organization as well to help people get insight into that, and to help them make some right decisions about themselves and their work-life balance and the experience that they want and need to get from the workplace. So I think that absolutely individuals and humans are the center of all of this, but there's a responsibility and accountability, from the organization side, and the HR being right front and center of all of that, being able to take all the different perspectives and experiences into consideration.
Yeah, it's complex. It really is complex when you do try and kind of look at the architecture, the re-architecture from the individual out. But if we look back at the dislocation of the workforce, and by and large, this great remote experiment has worked for the employer and also for the majority of workers. But have we gone through a one-way door the last year? Or do you think many companies will revert to type in terms of workplace?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't think that any company is going to just revert back, to pre-pandemic world and the way things were. I think the learning has been too deep and sustained and prolonged, to do that. And I think it's driven by both the organizations and individuals. People don't want to go back to the way things were. They've learned and developed. But there are some learning points from it, that people want to take the best of both worlds. So, maintain the agility and the flexibility, but also a connection, both socially, but also from a well-being point of view with the organization, and who they are and who they're working for, and the culture of an organization that they're working with and for. So I think that from what I'm hearing, everybody is saying we need to capture the learnings from the last year, but not necessarily just kind of go back to the way things were. And that there's a different shift and emphasis in that.
Yeah, but even looking at the data, like, do we have enough kind of research or data over a long period of time to sustain I think the viewpoint of how sustainable remote or
Yeah.
hybrid work is, and like I feel it myself. You probably see it in the last couple of weeks. Like there's nothing like homeschooling with kids to drive you back to the office, you know. But it's been tough. Like this one's been very tough, this lockdown, hasn't it? Like, you
Yes.
know, and I think people see it very differently. And like I think again, the question of like sustaining and like the initial findings, we were talking about this earlier of our report, it's signaling that a quarter of the workforce are likely to remain full-time remote. And then it's probably evenly split between those going back to the office and those who work some type of a hybrid model. But it's really polarized views. And like again, you'll see
Yeah.
those who are kind of frontliners and many speaking at Talent Summit. Like we've got like HubSpot, we have Dropbox and Zoom, who very much at the forefront of full-time remote and virtual first work. And then in the opposite end of the spectrum, Netflix. So Reed has said that nothing good will come from remote working. And then Patagonia, we've got speaking as well, who are a fascinating company, believe that their tribe are better together than apart. So it's
Mm,
still, the jury is really still out there. But
yeah.
what are the main challenges, do you think, for the workforce as we kind of go into this blended hybrid type model, which is what we expect it to be?
Yeah, good question. I think again, like you said, if we look back, probably a lot of the questions that were being asked when this started first last March to September was centered around productivity. Can we do the same things remotely to
Yeah,
the same level of efficiency and so on? And the general answer tended to be, yeah, productivity isn't particularly an issue. But that was really just looking at outputs as opposed to the effort to achieve those outputs. And I think that's where the conversation is coming around to, that whole bit around sustainability. So yes, we achieved great things in lots of organizations, you know, throughout this lockdown. But can we sustain that? And is it the right thing to sustain it? What is the human toll to sustain that same kind of level of productivity in such a different environment? And that whole piece around sustainability comes back to what supports do people need, and that can be quite individual. You know, as you say, the combination for some around homeschooling, socialization, and so on could be quite different to what somebody else might have with long commutes and difficulty traveling. So I suppose where I think we're heading is just this piece around individual differences and creating a workforce that will accommodate and embrace kind of individual differences and allow people, you know, contribute to the workforce in the way that best suits them. And that, I suppose, is leading to, you know, greater access to talent pools, more diverse talent pools, you know, this kind of, you know, access work anywhere type model. But as against that, organizations need to balance it with, well, who are we? Who is our tribe? What is our culture? What is the human experience that we want people who work for us to have that might be different for people who work in other organizations? So I think that it's that challenge across both those things. So the broader access to talent balanced against, you know, how do we create our culture and human experience for ourselves?
I see that. Like, we see it like in practice on a daily basis, like with candidates we're working with, Laura. So like the employer value proposition, again, like that's shifting rapidly. And what we're seeing being asked of us is like how did the company show up? How did the values stack up when they were needed most by their
Mm,
people? And that's ultimately, I think, a question of how the culture was experienced by their people, what action and process they put in to sustain the input and the well-being of their people,
mm,
and how will that carry forward, and how equal will that be for the remote, hybrid, and in-office workforce? And the question
yeah.
of equity amongst that workforce, again, like there's big risk factors there, aren't there? Like I know, like again, I've got kids here in the house now. Kelly's doing the heavy lifting, in fairness. So sometimes in the evenings I might kind of log back in, but that could create like a virtual teaism. Then people on my team might kind of feel they have to respond at certain times, and that's not the intent, but that could happen. And then the risk factor on the other side is that people will naturally gravitate towards where the influence lies, and if the leaders go back to the office, that sets a certain tone and statement, I think, for the workforce. And then you have
Yeah.
this like in-office bias becomes a risk, and then there's this managerial capital that those who are closest to management get the opportunities for promotion. So the question of equity, I think, is a big
Yeah.
one that's in the pipe that we haven't really considered as much as we should.
Yeah. And Rob, are you finding that organizations are deliberately setting out and defining the new employee value proposition, or are they defining kind of the new normal as to, how managers should behave or how promotions should happen to try to counteract some of those?
No, I don't think they are. No, no, I think some are kind of like they're dealing with it and they're just articulating what they see. But I think it's the COVID story that becomes the EVP for employers over the coming years.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of sides to that. I think what systems, practices, and tools have they put in place to sustain this distributed work? And what have they done from the HX perspective? Like what well-being practices have they put in place, supports have they put in place?
Yeah.
And how flexi are the benefits to support the individual, not the company, and also the motivation from the job seeker or the candidate has changed. Like it has pivoted literally over the course of a year. I think the question of culture is interesting as well. Like how do we assess like in a physical environment, as you know, it's artifacts, it's symbols, and things again are experienced in an environment,
Yeah.
and the collective behavior is experienced by the individual. But now it's very much about ideology, and if you think that through, like ideology is really a question of hearts and minds, and it's about stories. So if we are to reshape our value proposition around our culture, which is the defining proposition for nearly every organization out there, it's about the stories. So what stories or bank of stories do they have to articulate how they showed up for their people when they were needed most? And it's getting it through the ear into the mind and dropping that to the heart, because this is a heart and minds game. And it's a world war. This is a world war for the very first time, that there's global competition for local talent. And this cohort of full-time remote, they're the spoils of that war, Laura. And it will be fought digitally. So the front for this war for talent is going to be very, very different. But the tools and the armory that's needed, as you rightly say, is very different, and it hasn't been considered to the level that I think it needs to be to gain competitive advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, again, the role of the leader and HR and supporting the leaders is critical in this, because it's a different way of leading and a different way of getting to the hearts and minds of people. Because culture is driven by behaviors, exactly like you're saying. So therefore, it's even more important that those behaviors are seen in a way, across a virtual or a hybrid workforce or a dispersed workforce. And
Yeah,
therefore, I suppose that comes back to the leader, the skills of the leader, and being able to get that connection
yeah,
back out through to people.
it's high touch leadership in a low touch economy, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. And I think the opportunity, this once in a lifetime opportunity for HR leadership, how do you see that opportunity and how is it likely to play, do you think, Laura?
I think that, you know, organizations know that people are at the center of this, massive shift in the way things are done. And they know that when it's people related, that HR are front and center. I think the opportunity for HR is to use data and to be really clear drivers of business decisions. So it has to be, yes, about the human experience, and yes, about culture and understanding and making sure that you're creating a great environment for people to thrive in the future. But it has to ultimately result in business success as well. And HR are brilliantly placed in between both of those sides. But I think that HR need to be able to bring some data to the business to help them make some decisions. What's the implication of giving choice to people? What are the implications of policy changes? What's that likely to do to culture? What's that likely to do with our reach and how we deal with customers, our clients, and so on? So I think that HR are brilliantly positioned, as long as they use data to help bring the different stories together, and they help bring the individual kind of human experience up to an aggregated organizational level to help drive decisions for the future.
But I think in many ways, like that's how they've reacted and showed up over the last year. That their influence and impact has definitely increased and accelerated. But the mobilization, the communication, and the well-being is really the front that they've pushed. But a human answer to a human crisis, I think, is
Yeah.
ultimately the heart of the opportunity. And I think the soft power that has been created by HR leadership for hard business impact is really that pivot point. And again, I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for all of us to create a better work for the generation to come. Laura, if I move on just to the conference itself, who are you looking forward to hearing from?
As ever, I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody. Of course, I'm
That's
always
very
interested in
equal
Dave
on
Ulrich.
PC.
Yes, but it's true, because in previous conferences, some of the most insightful presentations were people that I hadn't necessarily heard of before, and I found them really useful. But of course, I'm looking forward to hearing Dave Ulrich. Patty McCord, I think, is always a fantastic speaker and gives great insight. And I think that they both, when I've heard or read of them before, have a great balance between kind of the theory behind, the rationale behind what they're doing, but also how they did it. So I think it's that kind of practical application that is always really useful and great learning. And other than that, honestly, it's everybody. Just really looking forward to it.
Yeah, the serendipity of some of them was funny. I had again, I'm a fan of Patagonia, right? So I have my trusty gilet there that I get slagged about quite often. But I was searching for an online typical COVID purchase. I was searching through my emails and looking for the receipt, right? And then I came across a talk that Evelyn Doyle, the HRD from EMEA, gave. I listened to it. I just stumbled across it, and it was so powerful. And I'm
Yeah,
really looking forward to kind of digging into their culture, what they're doing,
yeah,
and how they kind of have created this like real true sense of belonging, which is built around employee activism, which is really unique, I think. And then yesterday, I just saw that the Mars landing, and I was reminded of Bob Cabana. So Bob, the director of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, he was actually the first astronaut to assemble the International Space Station.
wow.
So the first person to spend time on the most remote place in the galaxy, and a real kind of, he's seen as a big hero over in the States, but real fascinating character. So looking forward to hearing him too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I'm really interested in the sports angle as well, and the
Oh
idea
yeah,
of high
yeah.
performance and dispersed performance, and the role of the coach versus the role of the player. And I think that's a fascinating angle. And again, it kind of goes back to, this is human experience. So you bring your whole self, and all the aspects of that as well. So I think that's great as well.
And that sporting analogy actually from the guys from Billy and Dara, we're in for a treat with both of those,
Yeah,
from New Zealand and the States, so real global view. But that person first, player second, like that's something I'm always reminded of, and
yeah.
I've learned that again from people like Dara over the years. Laura, I'm looking forward to hearing your talk on the day as well, and I'm looking forward to yeah. To learning tons and applying it so we can enhance the working lives of our people, which is ultimately our mission. But we're in good shape. I'm told it's likely to be one of the largest organization transformation conferences in Europe this year.
Brilliant.
So we're 2 weeks out. I'm looking forward to having people tune in from around Europe and around the world. And yeah, to learning, as I say, but ultimately applying it. So Laura, thanks a million for joining us, and
No problem.
please
Thanks,
appreciate the
Rob.
partnership and look forward to hearing what you have to say in under 2 weeks, broadcast live from Dublin. We'll see you then, Laura.
Thanks a million, Rob.
Thanks a million.
Bye.
Slán.
Bye.